Apologies for the interruption. Moving on to that question with the biodiversity index. The index was calculated for the two altitudes given here, so 350 and at 210. These ones were the other ones that were not quite given. Regardless of what you've calculated here, you've got a trend or a pattern already here. Please remember that the closer to 1, the higher your biodiversity index number is, the higher your biodiversity. So the larger the number of species and number of individuals within species you're going to get. Now, your question here, it already tells you what the 2 marks are. It says conclude and explain, and it gives you 2 marks. So you're going to have to conclude and you're going to have to explain. What conclusion can you get regarding the effect of water temperature on the biodiversity? You know from the very first graph where it said that the higher up the mountain you go, the cooler it gets, that so that the higher upstream is going to have a colder temperature. From these numbers, the colder the temperature, the lower the biodiversity index. And I do need the pirate sentence here, the higher, the lower the temperature, the lower the biodiversity. So to imply that trend, pirate sentence, here we go. The first mark comes from the higher the altitude, the lower. Oh, the second, I'm on the wrong one. Here we go. That's the first one. Here. The lower the temperature, the lower the biodiversity. Sorry, I skipped to the wrong part in the mark scheme. So the lower the temperature, the lower the biodiversity. Now, you need to do the explain part. The explain part, what do you know about living things on colder temperatures? Living things are full of enzymes. All these enzymes will not get enough kinetic energy for all the collisions that are required, and will not therefore carry out any metabolic processes, if that's respiration for these animals or anything else, protein synthesis. The entire metabolism will be slowed down. So kinetic energy, yes, you can argue as well that the shape of the enzymes is not quite optimum yet, but the key argument here would be less kinetic energy for all those enzymes to be active, so all your metabolic processes will be slowed down. And then the lovely one, you're going to get that a lot. Now, identify one other abiotic factor which is affected by altitude and explain why this may reduce your confidence in the conclusion. The other, so you can't have temperature. So identify is the first one. And then the second mark will be explain why this has a problem with the confidence of your conclusion. The factor you should have identified, and that is something you're going to do with me when we do component 3. The higher up in a mountain you go, the thinner the air will feel. This is to do with gravity and pulling particles, air particles as well, closer towards the center of planet Earth. So the higher up you go, the less gravity, and the thinner and thinner and less and fewer air particles you're going to have. So the oxygen density will feel rather spaced out, so particles spread further apart. So oxygen availability will be lower the higher you go. Here we go, it's your pirate sentence again. And explain why this may reduce your confidence. So if we've got a second factor, the explaining is, if you've got a second factor that might have an impact on your biodiversity, a second factor other than temperature, then hold on a second, we can't be absolutely sure that it's temperature alone. So further investigations would be needed there. Here we go. The higher altitude, the lower your oxygen levels, and the oxygen availability for respiration may be a problem. So the less oxygen you've got, the less you're going to have a respiration pathway available, and any other suitable explanation to say that actually it's not only temperature that is going to have an effect here. That should be question 1 sorted. I'm just going to keep going into question 2 a little bit. And here we go. You've got a lovely question where you're getting that phylogenetic tree, evolutionary relationships. You have got given the eubacteria, the archaebacteria, and you just need to know your third domain. Your third domain is your eukaryotes. That should automatically click in your head. You've got the 2 that are not having a nucleus yet, and the eukaryota that have the nucleus. Your question is name domain X and describe how all organisms in the domain are different So cell membrane bound organelles versus not having the eukaryote and prokaryotes. You have not got the karyote, the membrane around the nucleus, evolved at that point yet. Mark's game says eukaryota, and anything membrane bound organelles, multi-celled organism, the nucleus being there. You can even refer to the 80S ribosomes being present, whereas the others have the 70S ribosomes. So quite a range of things you can refer to in that one to get the 2 marks. In domain X, you have got other groups of Y and Z, and it gives you a lovely bit of information there. Group Y are phototrophic and group Z are heterotrophic. First thing is identifying, giving the names. So the first question is the level of classification. That's for you to click in. You have had your 3 domains. Now you need your 5 kingdoms. Okay, and your 5 kingdoms splitting up thing being a little bit more dodgy in the way that it has moved on in terms of evolutionary research as to what you've had in your GCSE days for your 5 kingdoms there. So your level of classification is kingdoms, and you should click in that the phototrophic that are missing here, they're the plants, and the heterotrophic, the needing to eat, needing to engulf and eat something else, that's your animalia. Mark scheme is straightforward. You've got your kingdom and plant and animalia animals. You can get away with quite a range there as well. Okay, again, the word other, one other distinguishing feature of groups Y and Z used to place them in these groups. So why are Y and Z placed in these groups? For other reasons. If you're thinking about it, why is a plant a plant? A plant is a plant because it's got chloroplast, because it's got cell walls made of cellulose, because it's got a permanent vacuole, whatever defines why as a plant. So here we go, cellulose, chlorophyll, no nervous connections, whereas the animals, animalia cell, the definition of an animalia, it has to eat. In order to eat, it needs to slither after its food, walk after its food, run after its food. So it's got a muscular system, and those muscles need to be coordinated somehow. So it's got to have a nervous system. Even if you're thinking back of your basic organisms, you're going to get to know them still in component 3. Hydra as the very first type of animals that just have tentacles that allow it to pull food into its gut system. You need some sort of nervous control to have a definition for animal. So the centrioles present, that is something we could have done. Nervous coordination, it needs to walk. I was a bit soft on the marking on this one because you didn't do that part of component 3 yet. There's going to be the nervous system part of component 3 that we are still to be covering. And as always, they are putting in questions from a different component paper in actually the paper where you think you are currently working. Right, and then comes your favourite Luca, your last universal common ancestor, and suggesting how the role of ATP. What is ATP? What does it do? How that role of ATP provides evidence that all organisms have evolved from a single common ancestor. ATP, what is the role of ATP? It's an energy carrier. It's the universal energy carrier. We don't know of any life forms that don't have ATP somewhere in their metabolic processes. We haven't found one yet, not on Earth and not on different planets yet. It may be that's what there is. So if all of them are using ATP as that universal energy carrier, then they must have some common biochemistry and therefore share a common ancestor. The Mark scheme is wording it. So it's used by all living organisms, used as the universal energy currency. It uses the word currency here rather than energy carrier, which is fine. You can rephrase those bits a little bit, used in nearly all biochemical reactions. And the last one here, actually, I would have overlooked that one. So in order to get to that to get to those metabolic processes, you must have some common DNA to have similar processes that make ATP. That is referring to ATP synthase. So how do you build ATP synthase? That DNA, that genetic information has to be somewhere. Where you place that ATP synthase is irrelevant if it goes onto a mesosome membrane or if it's in a mitochondria or if it's on a thylakoid membrane. That's irrelevant. So as long as you've got that ATP synthase DNA somewhere. Last couple of questions here. Binomial system, state the levels of classification. This is going back to this question here where you've had domains, kingdoms, and then going down through your ever so lovely memory aid that we've had to get to your levels of classification. The last two were your binomial name, your genus and your species, and you must have both genus and species there to get that mark. Last question of question 2 is explaining why the classification is tentative. Okay, suggest why its scientific name may change. Why is that whole situation tentative? The evidence coming in from DNA analysis, from your immunological analysis, whatever it is, protein sequences, we've got the list of how many there were. Because we've got new evidence coming in, reclassification may happen. It may be grouped into a different family altogether. It may not only be in a different genus. Therefore, its scientific name may be changing because of that new information coming in. So here we go. Based on new evidence available, therefore it's not fixed, and that evolutionary relatedness will need to be reviewed based on the new evidence found. If you've given an example and you said DNA analysis gives new information for reclassification, that will do. You'll get that mark. Right, okay, I'm going to stop that here. So we've got that question 2